In today's video, we will talk about criminal defendants, witnesses, and victims in criminal cases. Hello, and welcome to Ask Professor Price. I have been a lawyer for more than 35 years and a full-time professor for more than 10 years. People studying law or criminal justice or working in the legal or law enforcement fields need to know the roles of criminal defendants, witnesses, and victims in criminal cases. The reality is very different from how they tend to be portrayed in TV shows and movies. Let's look at some of the demographic characteristics of typical felony defendants compared to the average citizen. Typical felony defendants tend to be younger, male, racial minorities, unemployed, unmarried, less educated, and not from a nuclear family. This is, again, as compared to the average citizen. Compared to the defendant, witnesses and victims get very little attention in the courtroom, and there have been very few research projects done about witnesses and victims as opposed to the countless research projects done about defendants. Witnesses and victims in criminal cases express a lot of frustration with the system. Some of their primary concerns are, it just takes too long for a case to reach trial. When trials finally do get scheduled, they often get delayed and rescheduled for months later. It could even be 6 months or more. When witnesses and victims are in court, they lose wages because they're not at work. So then they feel as if they're victimized a second time. Also, having to sit in court with the defendant and any of the defendant's associates, that can cause witnesses and victims in criminal cases a lot of fear. And they don't get much love as they perceive it from the courthouse personnel. They find that the people working at the courthouse tend to be cold and indifferent. In other words, they don't seem to care about them or their cases. In reality, there's probably a good bit of truth to that. The personnel at the courthouse are handling often hundreds of cases every week, and they just don't have the time or the bandwidth to get emotionally involved or to focus too much attention on any one case. Now, the courts tend to get frustrated with witnesses. The main thing is witness intimidation. Using the catchphrase, snitches get stitches, witnesses might recant their testimony or even make something up totally in the witness stand. So they might recant or give false information when they're supposed to testify. Witness intimidation can go much deeper than you might realize if you haven't spent much time in the criminal courts, because about half of all violent crimes are committed by people the victim knows, whether they're relatives, acquaintances, or friends. So they know if they testify against the defendant, that defendant knows who they are and how to find them, and they can disrupt their life and make them pay for testifying in court. Domestic violence cases are particularly challenging. Historically, a spouse was legally allowed to beat their spouse and their children. They weren't allowed to kill them, but they were allowed to, as they say, discipline, even though often it was abuse, not discipline, and it was far more violent than it should have been, and no one stepped in to protect the victims. Even their own families would not step in. It was common decades ago to hear If, for example, if a woman had a spouse who battered them, who beat them up, and they would complain to their family and ask for help, they would often be told, "You made your bed, you lie in it." Thankfully, with increased education, the mindset of the general public is slowly changing. Now people are learning that domestic abuse is illegal, even if some people don't think it's wrong. And with increased education, victims feel empowered to take legal action. And the courts and the police do, sometimes not always, help them. So there has been a decrease in domestic violence over the last 40 years. It used to be that some police would not arrest a domestic abuser unless they committed a crime in front of the officers. They might show up at someone's house or apartment, and the one spouse would obviously be beaten up, and the other spouse would deny that they did it, and the police would just walk away. The only way they would take the abusive spouse into custody is if they abused the spouse right in front of the officers. People would get orders of protection, and those were not always even enforced. Please hit subscribe and the thumbs up icon if you enjoy this video. Also, please feel free to share this video with people you think could benefit from the information. YouTube uses the number of subscribers, likes, and shares in its algorithm to determine which videos show up in search results, and the higher these videos are in the results, the more people I can help. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about victim and witness assistance programs. There are victim assistance programs like MADD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There are victim compensation programs. Some states have Victims' Bill of Rights, and some courts allow, in the sentencing phase, victim impact statements. They allow people to come to court to tell the court how the crime impacted them and their family. There aren't as many witness assistance programs. The most well-known one is witness protection. People rarely choose that because it turns their lives completely upside down for years. Some people ask whether victim assistance programs help victims or manipulate them. And they ask what happens when the program has different goals or priorities, an agenda, rather than the victims. An example is if Mothers Against Drunk Driving get involved in a case, they might want the person to go to jail if they're convicted, but the family might prefer that the defendant go through alcohol treatment program, through an alcohol treatment program, and still be able to work and support the family. That way the family is not destitute, and the person gets the treatment for the underlying problem, as opposed to strictly punitive of going to jail. A few things to think about when you are considering victim assistance programs. Will it help the victim, or will it pursue the program's agenda? Both approaches are, of course, understandable. Please feel free to post in the comments your questions about criminal law or related topics that you would like to see covered in a future video. I cannot provide legal advice about specific cases or situations, but I can offer general legal information for educational purposes. law students, paralegal students, criminal justice students, and pre-law students, as well as people working as paralegals or in the criminal justice field, are the main audience for these videos, but everyone is welcome to learn about American law and our legal system. Please remember to subscribe so you can get notifications when I post a new video. Subscribing won't cost you anything, but it can help me to reach and help more people with these educational videos. Thank you. If you liked this video, you might like the next video about criminal justice stages from arrest to bail and arraignment.